Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan's Army Chief General RIYADH says a strong partnership between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia will benefit regional peace and security. He said this during a meeting with his Saudi counterpart, General Fiyad Al-Ruwaili in Riyadh. The two sides also discussed the Afghan peace process and bilateral defense cooperation. Pakistan has condemned organized attacks on its troops from across the Afghan border, saying such incidents are detrimental to peace and stability. The statement from the Foreign Office comes after 20 terrorists attacked a fencing party in Balochistan, martyring 4 soldiers and wounding 6 others. It said Islamabad has asked Afghan authorities to act against terror groups' operation from its soil. The Taliban have called for an unconditional removal of their leaders' names from the UN blacklist for the success of peace negotiations. In a statement, a spokesman for the Taliban said the first step towards any understanding is mutual trust, which can never be built unless their demand is met. Meanwhile, the Taliban have captured a district in northern Baghlan province, forcing government troops to retreat amid a recent surge in violence. The meeting of the G7 foreign ministers in London has been hit by a coronavirus scare after 2 Indian diplomats tested positive. India is currently undergoing the world's worst surge in cases, recording nearly 3,800 deaths and over 382,000 infections in a day. In Pakistan, another 119 people lost their lives to the virus, while more than 4,100 tested positive overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.2 million lives and has infected over 154 million people. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Army Chief General RIYADH says a strong partnership with Saudi Arabia will benefit regional peace and security. He said this during a meeting with his Saudi counterpart, General Fiyad Al-Ruwaili in Riyadh. The Army Chief also stressed the need for enhancing military cooperation between the two countries. They also discussed the Afghan peace process and bilateral ties. General Bajwa will hold meetings with other high-ranking officials during his visit. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is also scheduled to visit Saudi Arabia later this week. Khan is visiting the kingdom on the invitation of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Pakistan has condemned organized attacks on its troops from across the Afghan border, saying such incidents are detrimental to peace and stability. The statement from the Foreign Office comes after 20 terrorists attacked a fencing party in Balochistan, martyring 4 soldiers and wounding 6 others. It said Islamabad has asked Afghan authorities to act against terror groups operating from its soil. The Foreign Office also urged Kabul to undertake effective measures to avoid a recurrence of such incidents in future. In Afghanistan, at least 1 person has been killed and 3 more wounded in a roadside bomb blast in Kabul. Officials say the explosion targeted a bus of the Ministry of the Public Health. No group has yet claimed the responsibility for the blast. Meanwhile, areas of the Burqa district in Baghlan have fallen to the Taliban after clashes with the security forces. Police said the security forces are preparing for a counter-attack in the district. The Taliban have launched a countrywide offensive after the US missed the May 1 deadline for the withdrawal of the troops. The United States says it has completed 2 to 6% of its troops' withdrawal from Afghanistan. U.S. Central Command said an equivalent of 60 cargo planes or material has so far been removed ahead of the September deadline. In a statement, the CENTCOM said it has also transferred a facility in the southern Helmand province to the Afghan army. The command said it has sent more than 1,300 pieces of equipment for destruction. The U.S. military says it will provide weekly updates on the progress of the withdrawal. President Joe Biden has announced America's complete pullout by September this year. Pakistan has urged the international community to press New Delhi to release all the detained Kashmiris as senior Hurriyat leader Ashraf Sahrai dies in Indian custody. The 80-year-old was in detention of Indian forces since July last year under the Draconian Public Safety Act. He remained incarcerated in Indian jail under squalid conditions despite serious deterioration of his health and the prevailing COVID-19 crisis. Foreign Office spokesperson Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry says India's attempts to portray the legitimate Kashmiri struggle as terrorism is the violation of the UN resolutions. He said Pakistan will continue to support the Kashmiri people in their rightful struggle against Indian oppression. Iran says there are still a number of differences between Tehran and Washington at the nuclear deal revival talks in Vienna. In a media briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson dismissed the notion that the U.S. is insisting to keep the sanctions intact. Saeed Khatibzadeh said if that was the case, Iran would have pulled out of the negotiations by now. Khatibzadeh's remarks come days after he announced the finalization of the two draft documents addressing sanctions removal and Iran's nuclear activities. In Yemen, the government says the Houthi rebels have targeted the central city of Marib with a ballistic missile. No casualties or damage was reported from the attack. The Houthis have stepped up attacks in recent weeks to take control of oil-rich Marib province. Yemen has been ravaged by violence and instability since 2014, when the Houthi rebels captured much of the country, including the capital, Sana'a. U.S. President Joe Biden has reaffirmed Washington's long-standing partnership with the UAE in a telephone call with Abu Dhabi's Crown Prince. A White House statement says Biden and Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan reviewed their common quest for peace in the Middle East. It said they discussed the nuclear and regional dimensions of the threat posed by Iran. Biden also underlined the strategic importance of the normalization of UAE's relations with Israel. The two leaders also discussed the situation in Afghanistan and the humanitarian crisis in Ethiopia's Tigray region. At least one person has been killed and 6 others are wounded in Israeli air raids in northwest Syria. Syrian army says its air defenses intercepted several Israeli missiles over the Mediterranean port city of Latakia. It said the strike also caused damage to a civilian plastic manufacturing facility. Earlier, Syrian state media reported the Israeli attack also hit the town of Haifa near Latakia and Masyaf in Hama province. The attack also struck near a Russian airbase. 2 weeks ago, Israel accused Damascus of firing a missile that struck deep inside Israeli territory. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's mandate to form a government following an inconclusive election has expired. In a statement, the presidency said Netanyahu has returned the mandate to President Reuven Rivlin. Now, the president can formally ask another political leader to try to assemble a coalition government within 28 days. The next candidate is widely expected to be Yair Lapid, whose party placed second to Netanyahu's Likud in the March vote. If the new nominee fails, the president can ask the parliament to agree on a candidate within 3 weeks. And if the parliament cannot agree, the country would go to the polls for the 5th time in about 2 years. Israeli forces have clashed with Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in occupied Jerusalem. The forces also arrested 3 Palestinians, including a woman. Eyewitnesses said Israeli soldiers attacked 2 men and pushed them to ground before cuffing them. They said the soldiers invaded the neighborhood and attacked dozens of residents who were peacefully protesting against the illegal Israeli settlements. Meanwhile, Hamas's armed wing warned Israel against attacks on Palestinian residents in occupied East Jerusalem. Egypt and Turkey are set to hold exploratory discussions today to review the normalization of bilateral ties. In a statement, the Egyptian Foreign Ministry said political consultations will be held on May the 5th and the 6th in Cairo. It said the two sides will focus on necessary steps that may lead to the normalization of ties in the bilateral and regional context. Ankara and Cairo have been at odds since Egypt's army toppled President Mohamed Morsi, an ally of Turkey, in 2013. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu announced the opening of the first diplomatic channel with Egypt on the 15th of April. The United States says a strategic clarity on Taiwan policy carries significant downsides. This is the first time Washington has been reluctant to express its willingness to defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. Speaking at an event, U.S. Policy Coordinator for Indo-Pacific, Kurt Campbell, said it is appropriate to be concerned over the situation. Campbell said maintaining some degree of status quo with Taiwan is in the best interest of both the U.S. and China. He said any conflict between Washington and Beijing over the issue will not be contained to a small geographic area. The official added it will broaden quickly and trash global economy beyond anyone's prediction. The U.S. says the West needs to press Russia to honor its international commitments and obligations. Russia denies allegations that its actions are reckless, aggressive, or aimed against any country. In a tweet, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Moscow must be held accountable for its actions. Separately, in an interview, he said the U.S. is not seeking to escalate tensions, but will respond to Russia's reckless and aggressive behavior. Blinken said an in-person meeting between Presidents Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin will benefit both the countries. A Washington's top diplomat noted that the two sides can cooperate in areas where there is mutual interest. Myanmar's ambassador to the UN has called for more sanctions on the junta. Ambassador Kyaw Moe Tern told the U.S. Congress that Washington should target the state-run oil and gas company. He said the U.S. should also slap sanctions on the state-owned Foreign Trade Bank. Meanwhile, state media says the 5 people killed in Tuesday's explosion were building a bomb. In Mandalay and elsewhere, the pro-democracy supporters are staging an anti-regime protest. Teachers rallied in Moniba, pledging to continue their civil disobedience movement until democracy is restored. According to an activist group, at least 769 people have been killed in the crackdown on dissent so far. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. India has reported a record of nearly 3,800 deaths from COVID-19 and more than 382,000 cases in a day. Meanwhile, India's entire delegation to a G7 foreign ministers meeting in London is self-isolating after 2 members tested positive. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3.2 million lives as the number of infections approaches 154 million. More in this report.
As coronavirus crisis continues to ravage India, a court has ruled that deaths of COVID-19 patients due to lack of oxygen is a criminal act and not less than a genocide. The country's plans to administer jabs to all adults have been hampered by severe vaccine shortages. Experts are criticizing the government for a lack of preparedness in the fight against the virus that has claimed nearly 40,000 lives in April alone.
It's a spiral of preparedness, readiness, response, recovery, preparedness, readiness, response, recovery. It's a whole cycle. You don't stop, especially if we have seen that the virus is changing.
Over in the Americas, Brazil's former health minister told a Senate inquiry that President Jair Bolsonaro's government was aware that it was prescribing chloroquine to COVID-19 patients without any scientific evidence. Meanwhile, in Canada, Alberta province has reported its first death of a patient from a rare blood clot condition after receiving the AstraZeneca vaccine. Last month, the province of Quebec reported Canada's first death after the Oxford vaccine. In the US, the number of reported infections has dropped to its lowest point in 7 months. President Joe Biden has set a new vaccination goal to deliver at least one dose to 70% of adult Americans by July 4.
Our goal by July 4th is to have 70% of adult Americans with at least one shot and 160 million Americans fully vaccinated. That means giving close to 100 million shots, some first shots, others second shots, over the next 60 days.
President Biden also said the U.S. will send 60 million doses from its AstraZeneca vaccine stockpile to other nations by July 4. This comes as the United Kingdom's Prime Minister and U.S. Secretary of State agreed on the need for a global rollout of vaccines to end the pandemic. U.S. Trade Chief Catherine Tai also said the economic recovery depends on addressing global vaccine inequity.
Pakistan has recorded another 119 deaths from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the nationwide death toll has risen to 18,429. The ministry said out of nearly 4,500 tests conducted overnight, just above 4,100 came out positive. It said the positivity ratio has risen to 9.17%. The caseload has topped 841,000, out of which over 738,000 have recovered. The ministry said there are over 84,000 active cases in the country. Meanwhile, Planning Minister Asad Umar says the number of vaccinations in one day crossed the 200,000 mark. In a tweet, he urged those above 40 years to register urgently and others to adhere to the SOPs. In Niger, at least 16 soldiers and 4 civilians have been killed in an attack in the northwestern part of the country. The military said around 200 bandits attacked Benibango town near the Malian border. It added the bandits attacked the security forces and civilians at the same time. The military said the forces suffered losses after heavy fighting. It says some other soldiers were missing without specifying the exact number. This attack is the second of its kind recorded in less than a week at the Malian border. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says holding a second Scottish independence referendum will be reckless and irresponsible. Speaking to the media during a trip to the English Midlands, he said it is not the right time for a second referendum as the UK emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic. His comments came as Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon urged Scots to re-elect her as the First Minister. In a 2014 referendum on independence, Scots voted 55 to 45% to stay in the UK. Support for independence has risen over Johnson's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and UK's decision to leave the European Union. France and the UK have come head-to-head over post-Brexit fishing rights. This comes after London set new governing rules for French fishing boats near the Channel Islands. Maritime Minister Annie Guardin told lawmakers in Parliament Paris is ready to retaliate. She mentioned cutting power from France to Jersey, the largest Channel island. Britain on Friday authorized 41 ships equipped with vessel monitoring technology to fish in waters of Jersey. French officials say this list was accompanied by new demands not discussed with Paris. French fishermen say they are being prevented from operating in British waters because of difficulties in obtaining licenses. Bulgaria's President Rumen Radev has announced snap parliamentary elections on July the 11th. He took the step after a third and the final attempt to form a government following the April 4 polls failed. Radev said he will dissolve the parliament and set up an interim government on 11th of May. He said he expected the appointment of new electoral commission to be finalized by then. Prolonged political uncertainty could hamper the poorest EU member state's ability to restart its pandemic-battered economy. In Brazil, 5 people, including 3 children, have been stabbed to death after a teenage attacker broke into a daycare center in the city of Sordes. Police say they have taken the knife-wielding attacker into custody after he tried to kill himself. In a statement, they said the attacker, aged between 14 to 18 years, was taken to the hospital in the critical condition. Police noted the assailant had no criminal record, adding they are investigating the incident. Santa Catarina state has declared 3 days of mourning. In a statement, Governor Carlos Moises lamented the incident, expressing solidarity with the victims' families. Former U.S. President Donald Trump's ban from Facebook and Instagram has been upheld by Facebook's oversight board, but it criticized the permanent nature of the ban as beyond the scope of Facebook's normal penalties. It has given Facebook 6 months to review the decision and justify a proportionate response that is applied to everyone, including ordinary users. The former president was banned from both sites in January following Capitol Hill riots. At least 2 tornadoes have ripped through northern U.S. state of Texas, causing widespread damage. Officials say the tornadoes barreled through the Ellis County, injuring 8 people and damaging up to 50 structures. No fatalities have been reported so far, as authorities continue to examine the damage. Meanwhile, the state of Alabama is bracing for multiple tornadoes and damaging winds from a passing storm. The National Weather Agency says central Alabama was impacted by significant flooding and damaging winds. Neighboring states' agencies have also cautioned about flash floods in Tallahassee, Florida. Today marks the 200th death anniversary of Napoleon Bonaparte, whom France celebrates for his wartime glories and brilliant statecraft. However, many in the country's overseas territories are remembering him for his pro-slavery acts instead. Details in this report.
As France commemorates the anniversary of Napoleon Bonaparte's death today, Aurélie Ramassamy remembers a tyrant who reversed the abolition of slavery, rather than an emperor often celebrated for his battlefield triumphs. Like most Creoles on the Indian Ocean island of Réunion, one of France's overseas departments, Ramassamy is a descendant of slaves. In 1802, Napoleon restored slavery by decree in the French Caribbean and Réunion. Revolts were violently put down while white landowners and the empire got richer.
In no circumstances should Napoleon's image or persona be celebrated. However, it is important to highlight it, especially with regard to slavery, because it was him who had re-established slavery.
The 200th anniversary of Napoleon's death falls at a sensitive time when the global Black Lives Matter movement has resonated on French streets. Black historians say Napoleon's links to slavery remain unaddressed in the country, which still grapples with its colonial past and charges of deep-rooted racism.
The global resonance that Black Lives Matter had, for example, why does it resonate globally? It's not because it's imported from the US, it's because it resonates with some events that we have experienced, and as well as with the lack of knowledge of slavery and France's colonial past.
Scholars say the bicentenary is an occasion to start reshaping the myth that Napoleon was a national hero. Meanwhile, police brutality and racism in the past months has spurred demonstrations in France and its overseas territories.
A high-altitude cleanup is underway in Bolivia's Valley of the Souls. Hundreds of volunteers, aided by heavy machinery, are clearing the place, which has been hit hard by pollution. More in this report.
The Valley of the Souls, 30 minutes from the administrative capital, La Paz, in Bolivia's mountainous Andean region, is a major tourist attraction. But urban sprawl over years has left the picturesque spot littered with plastic waste and construction rubble. Now the Rocky Canyon is getting a cleanup as volunteers gather to shift over 15 tons of debris from the valley.
We are surprised and ask what is going on with the nature. It is a tourist place where many people come. The Valley of the Souls is a very special place, and many people have gathered here to be a voice for the nature and to get it the care and respect that it deserves.
Rooting through piles of garbage, volunteers said people needed to speak up more in defense of nature.
Las limpiezas son importantes.
These cleanups are important and we must continue with them because there is a great movement throughout the country. We have to continue until there is no place left that has garbage.
The valley is a protected area 3,965 meters above the sea level and cherished for its unusual geological formations.
In China, special events have been arranged to mark the country's Youth Day as part of the Golden Week. More about the celebrations in this short report.
Youth Day has been celebrated in China since 1949. It is associated with an important historic event in the development of Chinese democracy. To mark the event, a special program, Striving While in Youth, featured stage performances, including talk shows and musicals. These performances tell stories of how young people strive to realize their dreams in the new era. Many young people who excel in the fields of aerospace, poverty eradication, and deep-sea research were invited as special guests. They shared their stories in the transmission.
Dr. Shamshad Akhtar has been elected as the first woman chairperson of the Pakistan Stock Exchange. Her appointment was approved unanimously in the first meeting of the newly elected PSX board. In a statement, the PSX called Akhtar a veteran of the financial markets of Pakistan. It recalled that she previously served as the governor of the State Bank of Pakistan and caretaker finance minister. Akhtar worked with the World Bank for 10 years before joining the Asian Development Bank in 1990. She said her election is a proud moment after her years-long association with Pakistan's capital market. She said she looks forward to transforming PSX into a premier institution so it can raise its market capitalization. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Lows and the highs of the business world now. The U.S. stocks have opened flat after major tech stocks gave back an early rebound. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index opened nearly 0.1% lower, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite traded nearly 0.25% higher at open. However, the S&P 500 index landed in the positive category, trading more to 0.1% higher. Meanwhile, oil prices have risen after industry data estimated U.S. crude stockpiles fell more than expected last week, reinforcing bullish views on fuel demand. European Union's Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis says a diplomatic spat has jeopardized the ratification of a trade deal with China. In an interview, Dombrovskis said the environment for the approval of the deal was not conducive. The deal went sour after the EU and China traded sanctions over Brussels' accusations regarding human rights violations. Dombrovskis said the EU had suspended political outreach with Beijing. A spokesperson for the EU said the investment deal could not be separated from the wider EU-China dynamic. The deal was a work of years of diplomatic efforts and would have allowed the EU and China to access each other's markets with lax regulations. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. With the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.